Very good morning to everyone. When I founded ThingLink, I had a very simple idea. I thought, whenever you're moving in a visual environment, you should be able to touch the things you see and get more information. So we started building ThingLink as a tool to add content to images, additional information, so that images could become like a learning platform, that you could always find a way to learn more, learn about the relations between things that you see. And today we have a little bit over 3 million teachers and students using ThingLink in very many creative ways. I have a couple of the most creative teachers here in Italy who have actually shown us a lot of examples what you can do with this technology. And let me just play you one example here. This is from a workshop yesterday and the day before yesterday that was organized by Astrid and Licia here in the front row. We went to the Puccini house, and the teachers there were documenting their experience. So this was like a field trip that you would make with students, right? You go there, you experience it, you take photos, you record audio or sounds that you hear, you might take some videos, and in the end, you put them together into an experience. And so this is essentially what ThingLink does, that it lets you document of what you've seen, what you've experienced, and what you've learned. So, the past years when we've been building ThingLink, we had a very strong belief that this is a very efficient way for students to practice many things and to practice the essential skills of the 21st century, which are the critical thinking and creativity and collaboration and communication. Because when you create an interactive image, it combines so many things. You have to plan a story. You can practice different ways of documenting. You can do video, you can do sound, you must do research, you write, or you take photography. So it's a very, very rich exercise. But so recently we have started thinking that what is the theory behind it? If we talk about immersive storytelling, like Andrea mentioned yesterday, that immersive has become almost like a buzzword. Everything is immersive, and everybody is talking about immersive. But what does it really mean? And I wonder if these lights could be dimmed a little bit, because it's easier to see the text. So it's always a little bit scary to talk about theory, and I have to admit that I don't have a very long career as a researcher, but when I was at the doctoral school at the University of Helsinki, Department of Education, I got to work with very brilliant scholars and professors who were all specialized in using language, early childhood development, and human environment interaction. So I thought maybe I will go back to some of the books that we used to read at that time. And I thought an appropriate book, especially for this question, an appropriate book for this presentation was Lev Vygotsky's Mind in Society. Lev Vygotsky is considered as a pioneer of developmental psychology, specializing exactly in language development, and the creator of the like a social theory of language development. So I thought maybe what we do today is that I'm going to reject my original theme that I was supposed to talk about, and I'm going to make an imaginary interview with Lev Vygotsky and think like, would he say about immersive learning? How would he define immersive storytelling? So this is how it's going to go. I'm going to ask a question, and he is going to answer. And then I'm going to explain what he just said. Okay? So for example, if I ask him, what is ThingLink? He would say, well, ThingLink is students using language to visualize meaningful objects and relations in images. Okay? No, this was a warm-up question, but let's go to the real questions now. So I would imagine, for example, Paolo here in the front row probably would ask Vygotsky, how should we understand storytelling? Okay. Vygotsky would say, and I'm going to focus on each word, so I'm going to go slowly. Storytelling is a logical form of thought. It's an analytical process, including labeling, organizing, categorizing real and imaginary objects and their real and imaginary relations. Now, what's essential in this description is, first of all, Vygotsky separates visual perception from speech. And they are two very different kind of processes. Visual perception happens simultaneously, whereas speech is sequential. So whenever a student needs to use their language, they engage in a complicated process of singling out objects that they're talking about. They categorize them, they label them using their language, and then they organize them in a meaningful flow. So there are a lot of things happening simultaneously. And that's kind of the essential reason, for example, why students creating the content is so much more important than students just viewing the content. Okay. The second question is, what is so special about the immersive part of storytelling? And we touched this question yesterday during the interview. So Vygotsky would say, 360-degree images and videos, they expand the possible fields of perception. This is a key concept for him. Transcending space and time. Perception precedes other psychological functions. Now, when a child learns to speak, perception and language development are intertwined. Child can't talk without seeing something. So child starts to talk by pointing objects and recognizing what they are. Later on, we don't need to see things anymore to be able to talk about them, right? But in the immersive environment, seeing objects makes it possible for us to talk about new things, perceive new things, and enter to the new worlds. So that's why even if 360 is just a new format for images, it is radically new kind of format because it fills our fields of perception and makes it possible for us to use language in a new way. And I told an example yesterday that when last year I did a project on women's rights, and we created in our team a field trip to women's rights in 11 countries. And we chose images that makes it possible for you to visit 11 countries, feel like you're standing in the corner, and then you're learning about things that you didn't know about. That's a whole different experience than just, for example, watching a video or reading about those things in the book. And when you are the author, when you are the narrator and the storyteller, that experience will stay in you. It's your interpretation, and so you internalize the story in a whole different way. And by the way, these fields of perception don't necessarily need to be from real environments and real worlds. I have another example from Astrid, which I think it's a beautiful creative use of the technology. So what she did is that she had a project with 9-year-olds about early cultures and the emergence of religions. And what they did is they had built examples of early cultures in cardboard boxes. Okay, kids have crafted these and they have built it themselves. And Astrid put a 360 camera inside those boxes, so they became environments where you can make that you can perceive and you can start interpreting and telling stories about. Let's look at this example. This probably doesn't have audio. Oh, it does. So you are standing in a cardboard box. And this is created by 9-year-olds, and a whole different experience. And changing the perspective. I think it's beautiful. Okay, let's go to the next question. Now, again, if we ask, how would Vygotsky describe the tagging, the annotation, adding content to images and videos? So he would say, naming or describing real or imagined relations between objects in our field of perception using verbal or visual language, reflecting and modifying the projected external world. I know this is a complicated sentence, but these are the kind of concepts and words he would use. But what I want to emphasize here is that, first of all, what we decide to single out from images, it's our decision. They can be real objects, or it can be something that you imagine. Depends on your story, depends on what kind of story you tell. But the thing is that you get to reflect and you get to modify the world. And this is the interesting part of working with 360 images, and I think it was Astrid again who mentioned me on a phone call once. She said, this is like play, because you get to interpret something that's between reality and your imagination. You get to modify the world and put your story in it, so it's your interpretation. This is an example just about singling out objects with meanings, and also like I guess a key point Vygotsky had is that how humans and animals differentiate, that whereas animals are able to single out objects, but those objects don't have meaning to the animals, whereas it's a unique feature of a human being to be able to attach meaning and identify meaning in all objects. Then we would ask Vygotsky, how can young children benefit from immersive storytelling? And Vygotsky would say, a child learns to speak by singling out and categorizing meaningful objects in their field of perception. Guiding attention, simple things like labeling, create new structural centers to perception, supporting the internalization of new concepts and meanings. What does it mean? It means that a lot of teachers, for example, there are a couple of teachers from preschool from Finland. The way that they use ThingLink is that they use it exactly for labeling and singling out the things that a child might see on a field trip. So this field trip is done with 2-year-olds, okay? 2-year-olds and a little bit younger, who might not speak quite yet, who are just learning to speak and learning to use some words, okay? So what the teachers did is that they went to the forest and the teachers took photos of all the things that the kids found in the forest. So the kids found some ants, they found a frog, they found twigs, and this is what they paid attention to. And the teachers took images of each of them, and then they put them in this story. And later on, when they were back at school, they showed this back to the small kids, who of course love to touch. They see the little dots, and so they love to touch the image, and then they like to practice their words again and repeat. They go back to the memory, and the teacher invites and engages them to speak about what they saw. So this is a good example of a very simple labeling and just identifying what do you see in the environment. Somebody who suspects does everything need to be digital might ask, why digital? Why not just pen and paper? Vygotsky would probably say something like this: we perceive the world through our speech. If you learn to use multiple forms of speech for expressing relations in real or digital environments, it does expand our cognitive capabilities. And I want to give you an example of different forms of speech. Of course, how we understand it today, that speech can be text, speech can be spoken, verbal language, or speech can be visual language. But I'll give you here an example of, I had a course with, or I gave a course on digital storytelling to 5th graders in Palo Alto in California. And we went on a field trip to a stadium, Levi Stadium. And I gave the children a possibility to use their own voice any way they wanted. Let's see if the audio carries that way. I don't actually know if the audio is connected, but I will anyway show. So just to mention beforehand, sometimes there are students who are a bit shy, but if you give them a chance to take an expert role, and so they might use their voice completely differently what they would normally do. And in this case, we have children who were very confident, improvising and using their voice. Then we had shy children, but who who like to take the expert role, and then we have completely, how would I say, children who use their voice in an unexpected way. There is one student who, for example, said he doesn't have anything to say, but he would like to sing it. So the students explain some things that they see in the pictures, and then there is the different students are narrators in the background.
Now we are in the field where people play the games.
This is what the student wanted to do.
This is the home field of the San Francisco 49ers.
It was very, very interesting.
The San Francisco
to see how
49ers are a professional American football team located.
The recorded sound.
This locker room is for the guest players, so they can change into their gear before the game.
This was the expert who wrote down what he's going to say.
Here's the Hall of Fame where the most memorable players and coaches' statues are kept.
And you can imagine that when the teachers saw this, because when we presented this work to everybody afterwards, we had worked in small groups with the children, and then everybody saw the tour in the end, and the teacher was like, "You sound so professional. I had no idea you could do something like that." And everybody was very proud of themselves. Okay, so a related question to this, how does play relate to all this? Play is an important concept that Vygotsky wrote about. So Vygotsky says about play, play is a psychological process through which we create an imaginary situation, separating objects and their actual meanings and creating new meanings. The ability to digitally modify projected environments is a form of play. This was what Astrid was saying. It's a form of play, opening a realm of spontaneity and freedom connected with pleasure. And this explains a little bit why children get so excited and why teachers actually get quite excited when they get to create this experience. Because it does give them the opportunity to play, build in their own narrative. There are really no rules or limits, except maybe the file size or something like that. But that's a free, open field for your expression. And here is an example of the same preschool tour what we did. After they done the teacher's exercise, now one of the 2-year-old had said, "I want to put my own animals in that forest." So the teachers were open to this idea, and they let the small children to choose their favorite animals and then to put their stories in this. For example, here you can see a little dinosaurus in this forest, and then here you can see a spider, and what it reads under the spider, it says, "Spider sees a giraffe. The spider goes to giraffe and they play." Right? So the teachers were very, very open to just giving the small children the opportunity to start imagining what is happening in the forest. Okay. And I want to come back to this important point about expert roles, because this also connects with play. When you give students the opportunity to choose that if they like to take photos, if they like to think about sound effects, because or audio, if they're into recording audio and narration, or if maybe they like videos, or maybe they just like to do research, background research and facts and so forth. When you give them an opportunity to choose an expert role, they very enthusiastically go into that role. And I think it's important that not everybody needs to be good at everything, but you can choose. Maybe you already have a strength in something and then you're more comfortable in when you start the planning and storytelling, you're more comfortable because you're doing something that you're interested in and you're good at. And as I said, many times and we noticed even with this one experiment that sometimes with students that are more shy, this gives them an opportunity to express themselves in a whole new way. Okay, we are coming to an end. Lastly, I would ask Vygotsky, what do you think of virtual assistants? Will virtual learning assistant revolutionize learning? What's the role of robots in school, okay? What would he say? He would say, if one can serve as the more knowledgeable other, every learner should have one. Okay? The more knowledgeable other refers to anyone or anything who has a better understanding or a higher ability level than the learner with respect to a particular task, process, of concept. And the other key concept, and these two are interlinked, is that it is the concept of zone of proximal development. So he says problem solving with the more knowledgeable other expands the zone of proximal development. And the idea of zone of proximal development is that if a child gets an opportunity to learn, and this of course happens all the time, the child learns with their parents, with their teachers, or with their mentors who know more about the whatever they're learning about. Typically in the beginning, adults use language better. The child learns language from their parents, right? So there is typically, there is always the presence of a more knowledgeable other. And the child learns faster. For example, younger child learns faster when they play with older kids. Now, what's interesting is that virtual assistant, or even if we think about Google search today, Google search is kind of like a more knowledgeable other already. We can very quickly find information, so then we learn faster. And you can think about virtual assistants exactly the same way. They certainly have a higher capacity of processing information. So they could serve as a more knowledgeable other that help us learn. And just, really plainly simplifying this is search engines already, they help people learn. And as they evolve, they will have a big impact on how we as humans learn. And this also comes back to one of the key points that Vygotsky makes, which is that you cannot understand human learning without the cultural context. that there is always the historical development of the culture impacts on the development of how we learn. And when new technologies emerge and we adopt them, this will have an impact on how we learn. Okay, to summarize, immersive learning is a fascinating subject. It's an important topic to think about. But what we need to do is we need to go to the core processes. We need to go beyond the term and really understand the key concepts and elements when we talk about learning, because then we can appropriate the new technology better. Okay, so this has been a great exercise. As I said, I decided to change my topic on the airplane on the way here and make this interview instead of something else. I do have to mention that I think that immersive learning has other dimensions, not only this. One of my favorite topics to talk about is the social dimensions of immersive learning, but I will save that to my presentation in the evening. Okay. Thank you very much. If you want to email me, you can reach me from ulla@thinglink.com. If you're interested in trying ThingLink yourself, we have a promo code for Didaktika, which gives you 70% off if you want to try the 360 editor, so feel free to sign up. Otherwise, I very much thank you. This was a text-heavy presentation, but I will make the presentation available to you later on if anybody is interested. Thank you.